yeah, actually what happened was that Atlantic put out the CDs, and in the past I'd always been in charge of, mastering the records, and there were a lot of, some of the CDs didn't sound at all up to scratch to me, they just didn't sound right, and this gave a really good opportunity to get it right. Get the sound right on them, improve them, by going back to the original studio master tapes, that sort of pre-production tapes, wherever possible, that is. And then, because by nature of the fact that it was a 4 CD package, to represent them in a different form, so it became like the old picture with a new frame. And it's really interesting, actually, because it sheds new light on everything, I think, They were all over the place, really. It was a treasure trove trying to find them all. But fortunately, we were reasonably successful with that. I had some in my own possession, but then other ones that were supposed to be in, like, security archives, some of those were there, and then you find some somewhere else. But the ones that I handled personally were where they ought to be, so that was fortunate. I guess the hardest part was getting the running order to go across the 4 CDs, and taking tracks from all of the 9 albums that would be, wouldn't it, really? And interlacing them and getting them to all feel comfortable and being comfortable with them myself, Well, the clarity, obviously, is going to is enhanced. That's the major point of it. But I think the key to it is the new running order as well. That's the thing that we really, I think people find most exciting about it, I hope. It just sheds new light on it, and that's I think that's going to be the interesting thing in retrospect, to see what people's reaction is to it. I think it'll be pretty positive. We didn't have any sort of golden nuggets left, so to speak. Everything that was left over since In Through the Outdoor, and after we'd lost John, that was completed. In other words, with vocals, etc. And maybe they needed a remix or whatever, but they came out on Coda, and that was in light of the fact that there have been so many bootlegs out. Countless more now, as we all know, but at that time, so many bootlegs out of live performances, and we thought, well, it would be, a good idea just to put those things out then. So, in fact, they went out on Coda as opposed to coming out on this. So, in fact, there wasn't any studio material left. So, as these things had sort of surfaced and been played apparently on radio stations over there, we thought we'd include them. We had Travelling Riverside Blues, which had been recorded for the BBC many years back, 69, 70, and it actually sort of surfaced. It surfaced during the last tour that I did. As I was doing sort of radio interviews, people were saying, and what about this? And they'd play it, and I'd say, was it an outtake from the second album? There was a big theory that that's what it was. So, as it was around, there was a lot of interest. We thought we'd put that on. And then, of course, there's the White Summer, which again was done on a live broadcast with, we did a whole set at that point, but we just included that one. I think they all benefit from the new EQing, actually. It just makes them crisper, and there's more space to them. I mean, there's numbers on there, for instance, Achilles' Last Stand, which sounds absolutely fantastic. It sounds phenomenal, and that's a number that I think, that was sort of missed by a lot of people, really, because Presence wasn't necessarily very, wide-selling or whatever album. It wasn't sort of. It's pretty well received by people that I've spoken to, but it didn't sort of sell, in the volume as, for instance, previous albums. And that sounds really great, I was really seduced by rock and roll at an early age, that's for sure. But that was a record where I listened to it and I thought, wait a minute, there's just an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, a bass and a voice, and it just sounds, just sounded so dynamic that that's the point when I started to try and get this instrument that I had at home into some sort of shape. You know, we had a guitar laying around the house. It had been given to us by somebody, and I don't even know who it was who gave it to the family. We've been sitting around for years, and of course there wasn't anybody who could really sort of play in those days. You know, I just fortunately happened to find someone at school who knew a few chords, and once I got the thing in tune and learnt a few chords, and I went on from there. I had in my mind exactly what I wanted to try and get together, and then it was just a matter of searching around for the right personnel that could pull it off. By that I mean, you know, for the sort of work that I'd managed to expand around the Yardbirds material, because there was a lot of areas in there for improvisation, and I'd come up with a lot of riffs of my own, and ideas, and, you know, passages and movements and things. That, along with the incorporation of the acoustic work, you know, this was the idea of it, along with the blues, etc. So my first choice was either Steve Marriott or Terry Reid. Steve Marriott was already involved in something. Terry Reid, who actually was my first sort of choice, actually put me on to Robert. And Robert had been playing up in the Midlands, and I don't think he played down in the South, so consequently I hadn't heard of him. And once I heard him sing, I was pretty impressed, to say the least. And I invited him to come down to my house and spend some time down there, and we'd discuss exactly what the plan was, and see how he could get along with it. And he was reasonably mutable, so it worked. And he although I had in mind a very powerful drummer, you know, I wasn't ready for John Bonham. I must say he was beyond the realms of anything that I could possibly have imagined, you know. It's absolutely phenomenal. And still is. I mean, his work's just incredible, isn't it? And actually it was during this point of me going around and seeing Robert that Jonesy called me up and said, I hear you putting a band together. There's all this nonsense about ads in the Melody Maker is absolute rubbish. He actually called me up and said, hey, you're getting a band together, and I'd like to be part of it if you consider me. So I said, all right, well, we'll all get together. And we got together and had a rehearsal, and we didn't look back from there. The first album took about 36 hours or something like that, in actual hours. Obviously it wasn't, you know, go in the studio and work for 36 hours, it was over a period. But when it was all added up, it was that, you know, that amount of time. I mean, I knew by the studio bill. But we had actually played these numbers live, because there were a few dates to fulfil from the Yardbirds. And we went over and fulfilled those, and went in and recorded, and then of course we changed the name. We went over to the States to support Vanilla Fudge on a tour, and that's when things started happening over there. Well, actually, you know, it was great, you know, receptions to what we were doing there, because obviously I've been in the Yardbirds, and I guess people were really curious to see what was going to be coming, you know, and it's well received. But it was when we actually went to San Francisco that it really took off, because we were supporting Country Joe and the Fish, and I think Taj Mahal was on as well, and I remember it was just like dynamite. Backwards echo was one that I invented at the time, and I know the engineer said it couldn't be done. Well, I knew it could be done because I'd actually suggested it before on a Yardbirds track. And I said, why don't you try this idea, and it was backwards echo, reversing the tape, recording the echo, and then putting it round on the right way again so that the echo would precede the signal. And the engineer, Glyn Johns, at the time, for the first album, he's the engineer for the first album, he said, this is impossible, won't work, it's impossible. I said, will you do what I'm telling you to do? Just do it. And of course, when we put the tape round the right way again and played it back, he was grudgingly moving the fader up, and you could hear this fantastic sound. It was only really employed on that album, on the end of You Shook Me. The most satisfying, you know, it's the most rewarding part of it, as for me talking about it now, is the fact of having, been part of music like that, which has stood up to the test of time. I think every musician hopes that their music will hold up, and let alone having been part of a fabulous band as well, and to the bargain, it's wonderful.
I remember the little room. All I can remember was it was hot, and it sounded good. Very, very, very exciting and very challenging, really, because I could feel that something was happening within myself and to everyone else in the room. It felt like, I don't know, we just found something that we had to be very careful with this thing that we'd found because we might lose it. But it was remarkable, just the power. Well, we'd pick out all the records that more or less formed the basis for Led Zeppelin, the first Led Zeppelin album. A lot of Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, Joan Baez, Larry Williams, a lot of rockabilly, Gene Vincent, stuff I talk about when I'm talking about my own career and why I still do what I do. A lot of stuff left and right from center, and I took a load of Moby Grape stuff, the first 2 Grape albums, and Forever Changes by Love, or a lot of American West Coast stuff, which really had caught me and saved me from ending up being the typical English pub singer, because I found that in California, or the Californian musical scene was at least the spearhead or the great indicator of how music should actually have some bearing on, or at least some little pointers and indications on actual social behaviour, if you like, and social awareness. So I came loaded up with that, and Pagey was playing blues and rock and roll, and it was great. If we did nothing else, that was really good. Yeah, well, Jeff, he wasn't really consistent about his playing, isn't that a nice way of putting it? He'd run away a lot, and quite rightly so. I mean, some people like it and some people don't, playing on the road. But anyway, whatever happened, and we ended up in Denver, 26th of December, 1968, with a silly look on our faces. And, well, it just happened. If I'd have been a little more relaxed and a little less intimidated, it would have been, for me, it would have been that much better. I'd have sung the same songs with the same phrasing, but I would have sung them, I don't know, a bit less nervously. It's just that, like, the performances aren't that great. The records are super, They're all good. There ain't a bad record. But it's just, when you look back, you become very analytical. And when you analyse an entire piece, then it's usually something to do with the mood that you're in, or the conditions that you work under. And I was very intimidated. I don't know, I mean, maybe I had a complex, or maybe I was just neurotic or paranoid or something like that, but I thought, this is all too much. Am I really here? Do I belong in this sketch? And so really the record feels like that for me, for my contribution. But it really, as a collection of tunes and a way to play and expand, it was great. The element of risk was the great thing about it. In certain areas within the set, we knew that there was going to be excitement factor, where we were going to try and do something or go somewhere, which we hadn't plotted at all, hadn't planned, and see if we could get out of it. Well, in the end, we just kept getting out of it and forgot about the music. And not really. No, it was all... The great thing about it was always an opportunity for somebody else to contribute from another direction. Bonzo came up with riffs by singing them while he was playing odd drum patterns, and Jonesy would come up with great stuff. I think Jimmy was more studious, if you like, and worked much more at home on things, and gave it much more long-term period thought. I didn't really do that because I didn't really play anything, and I didn't really want to. I didn't want... When I was doing it, and when I wasn't, I certainly wasn't, I couldn't go around like I didn't feel that I had to go around with a cloak of endeavour around my shoulders all the time. When we were in LA, we wanted to try and use the studio Gold Star, which Phil Spector did his early most successful stuff with that huge wall of sound. But they'd taken all the equipment out, and Gold Star was, I think, where Cochrane did some of his stuff. And so we ended up going to Delphi Studios, where Chan Romero and Richie Valens had recorded, and we did I think we did Moby Dick there. And then we did a Ramble On in New York, bits of Bring It On Home in Vancouver, I think. All we wanted to do was keep stretching. This is the whole thing about Led Zeppelin, or about Jimmy or myself, or anything that happens. John Paul too, he's composing some quite remarkable music in England in a different field. And we wanted to try and stretch it out and open it up and change, just shock ourselves to see exactly what we could do. So we set off in a Jeep with Strider the dog and some kids, 2 women, and a gypsy bodyguard. We just started trying going back into more of an acoustic vein. It wasn't an area that we hadn't touched, because Your Time Is Going to Come, Babe, I'm Going to Leave You All. And the total awareness of, or not total, but just being exposed to the incredible string band and Roy Harper and all that sort of stuff around, which was music for the head, which was coming from more acoustic based. And that's what we did, and I think it was a great success. The least successful Led Zeppelin album, and with the critics screaming for our lives and blood, saying, "What's this crap?" It was probably one of our finest moments. And the fact that we deemed that we had to do it at all is a fine moment. House of the Holy was really probably one of the... I think it was really a very inspired time, because I think the material is very much to the point. It's very focused and strong. I think the crunge was great. Rain Song was really good. And I think there was a lot of imagination, and I prefer it much more than the 4th album. I think it's much more varied, and it has a flippance with stuff like Jamaica, which showed up later again in Through the Outdoor, with stuff like Hot Dog, and Candy Store Rock on Presence, which was a complete sort of me trying to be Ral Donner or Elvis or whatever, just like on Nirvana Now or Hurting Kind, I think it was a very successful time, and things like Jamaica, we were going for an ultimate drum sound. There was a track by Dee Dee Warwick called Foolish Fool on Philips that was a minor hit, black hit in Detroit around that time, and we tried to get the drums to sound the same as on her record. She was Dionne Warwick's sister. Hopefully still is. And it was a great record, really good, very proud of that, a great time. And it was quite smug, the fact that we'd done House of the Holy as a song, but we put it on Physical Graffiti. It was all as usual twee English schoolboy tricks. Following the 75 tour, Jimmy and I, we finished off, after playing in America, we played for a week at Earl's Court in London, which was quite an achievement. And we just had to get away, so we went to Morocco. And it was great to get away, and especially as Jimmy, I don't think had been to Morocco before. It was good for me to show him places that I'd been to, and the kind of hubbub of Marrakesh, chaos. And then we headed south into Tantan, towards Tantan, which is where the edge of the Mauritanian Spanish Sahara war with Morocco was later to go on. And somehow or another, the lyrics to Kashmir have developed along that road somewhere. Traveling Riverside Blues, when a man gets personal and wants to have his fun. When I was a kid, and I used to go to all the folk clubs and listen to people singing unaccompanied vocal work, rather in the lines of sort of English folk song, the derivation of English folk song, the unaccompanied coal miner from Durham wailing away about the bloke's making all the money and he's not getting any. And then you had the Woody Guthrie element, the kind of Americana with the Jack Kerouac existentialist sort of movement. So you've got all this kind of blues stroke folk stroke jazz, which I was a little young to be really comprehensive, to have a comprehensive schooling on it. But I was just about old enough to look like I could get into these clubs because they served alcohol. And I got in, I used to sit at the back and listen to all this stuff. And I was weaned and drawn into blues, and on June the 20th, 1937, in Dallas, Traveling Riverside Blues was first recorded on Columbia. And it says, if a man gets personal and wants to have his fun, best come back to Friars Point, Mama, and Barrel House all night long. Now, the idea of that, it seemed much better than Chartered Accountancy. The idea of some troubadour going up and down the Mississippi River, getting off at the landing and playing, and really having a good time, and being kind of not a modern highwayman, but like it's not even the bard who goes from court to court and sings the praises of the king and then moves on safely. It's just the idea of this guy getting away with it. Now, Robert Johnson didn't get away with it forever. He was murdered. I'd like to maintain the dignity of the group. I'm very proud that people are so enchanted by it. And I think the way that it is now is that whatever it was that people loved is not going to be spoiled. And I think the fact that Led Zeppelin was bold and brave and chaotic and honest in a very loose framework. It was honest, and it took risks and chances which are no longer possible if you start from scratch. I think its integrity musically, it captured all the elements of the kind of wondrous music that we'd all been exposed to. I think what we did was we were able to translate and kick on. It's like it's like we were a filter for all the good things. We filtered it, and we begged, borrowed, and stole, and we made something that was particularly original, by which a lot of other music has been measured.
My father was a pianist, and we used to go out gigging, and although he originally wanted me to take up the saxophone, because he said that the bass guitar would be just a passing sort of fad. And he said, you should take out the saxophone because you'll never starve, one of those. And then, so I didn't want to play the saxophone, I wanted to play the bass. And then he found I could play, and so he said, all right, good bass players are hard to come by, so off we went doing sort of weddings and Masonics and the usual run of things. Everybody. In England there was no specialisation. So you don't have like a country session players or rock players or pop players. Everybody does everything. And in those days the session scene was very, very large and active. And one would do, I've done, like Rolling Stones, Everly Brothers, French rock and roll sessions, German ones, Engelbert, Tom Jones did all his stuff, and everybody. I mean, you just literally, and all in the same day, quite often, yeah. The only real impetus I had for arranging was panic. I put my hand up, you know how it is. Somebody says, can you do any arrangements? Yeah, sure. And then as the session gets closer, you get a book. And try and work out what goes where and that sort of thing. And after a couple, you find, you're an arranger. It happens that way for a lot of people, I think. We first played together in a small room in Gerrard Street, in a basement room. In what is now Chinatown, and it was just wall-to-wall amplifiers, just Marshalls sort of. And there was a space for the door, and that was it. And literally, it was just everybody looking at each other. Oh, what should we play? And me doing more sessions, didn't know anything at all. So there was an old Yardbirds number called "The Train Kept A-Rolling," which Jimmy said, well, it's just like it's in E, and you go down, digga, right, so 3, 4, 5, and wow, the whole room just exploded, lots of silly grins and oh yeah, this is it, man, yes, and, it was pretty bloody obvious actually. it was going to work from the first number. The name Led Zeppelin was coined by Keith Moon, which was originally going to be for a band that recorded a thing called Beck's Bolero, which was Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Nicky Hopkins, myself, and Keith Moon. And I think we did a couple of tracks actually. Well, that and the B-side. and then the thought of it all going on the road, I thought, was sort of fairly horrific. Quite a bunch of characters, as you could probably imagine. And so that never came about, but we remembered the name and asked if we could use it. As far as structuring the stage stuff was concerned, certain songs wouldn't really change that much, but other songs would really have points where anybody could do anything. We used to call it the band of nods in those days, because you could just one nod and and we could just go play something else, start a blues or start a country piece or start a bit of James Brown or something like that, and then everybody would follow until that idea had run its course, and then off it would go somewhere else. There were several songs that we could do that. We allowed ourselves the space to do, and that was really good, really enjoyable stuff. A nightmare. I had a Hammond organ and a mellotron. Oh, that mellotron. You would just approach it. There was one song we saw, the Rain song, which was just start off on guitar, and then the next thing you would hear was strings on the mellotron. And I used to just approach this thing with the greatest trepidation and fear. So when I put my hands on those keys, what is going to come out? Will it be in anywhere near pitch? Will it be at half speed? Will it be a string sound or a flute sound? Oh, I was just, and as the thing used to heat, because it was a system of tapes, literally of tape loops, and it was all mechanical, and there's plumbing inside of it and everything, and as the gig would heat up, the tapes would start stretching a bit, and the motors would slip, and I spent my entire technological career trying to replace the mellotron. I went all over the world looking for things to replace the mellotron, and I did. Even up as far as 1980, where we actually took a Fairlight on the road. The main advantages were that nobody knew what you looked like. If I got to a city, I could just go out and walk and generally see the sights and get around, whereas Robert is just so recognisable. They found it hard to actually leave the hotel without causing great trails of people. You can't sit in a restaurant or a bar or anything. But I used to get away with, once I'd slipped the security, especially in later years, just sort of creep out the back door and just get out on the street. So yes, it had a great advantage for me there, which is how I prefer it. Just like the idea of going somewhere to write. It was a focus, really. Somewhere you could go and write, and then when you were ready to record, wheel in a truck and do it that way, rather than be in a place where you write and then go to a place where you record, or being in a place where you record trying to write, which is the worst thing and the most expensive, of course. And studios aren't really that conducive to making music. The early Boston Tea Party concerts was the biggie, really, for us, and we really knew it was working. Plus, it was the longest concert we ever did. We played 4.25 hours, I think, which, with an hour-and-a-half act, is some going, I can tell you. We played 4 nights at the Boston Tea Party, and the last night, I think we did the act twice, and then we did everybody else's act. We did the Beatles songs and Stones songs and Who songs and everything. It was really good. It was really steaming. We used to try everything. Basically, if you're a guitar, bass and drums band, you've got to come up with something a bit different each time so that all the tracks don't sound the same. And we used to have amps everywhere, and in rooms, up stairwells and bathrooms, and outside we recorded, and we worked with good engineers too, who would be prepared to put up with all this stuff. Again, one of the advantages of not working in a recording studio all the time. is if you were in an old house, you could find a cupboard that you could stick a guitar amp in, or in Headley Grange, like the sound which wrote the song really of When the Levee Breaks. That whole song just came from the drum sound, because we'd set him up. We were doing another song, and there was a lot of leakage from the drums, so we set him up in another room, in the hall. There's a big stairwell. It's about 30-40 foot high, and there was one mic. There was 2 mics on the drums, one at 10 foot and I think one at 20 foot. No bass drum mic. They were both above him, up the stairs. Basically one hanging on the first floor and one hanging on the second floor. And that was it. And we just started playing. Jesus, we listened to that sound. And then, I can't remember who started the riff. That's how that song came about. And so, yeah, through experimentation.